Ever cut someone off and never looked back? Right, I did, if so.
I wasn't invited on the family vacation this year, not because I couldn't afford it, or because I was busy, or even because we'd fought recently. No, I wasn't invited because, according to the short, detached text my father sent me at 9:38 on a Thursday morning, "It'll just be simpler this way." That was it. No punctuation. No warmth. Just 7 words that might as well have been a slap, sent without context, without conversation, without any acknowledgement of what that decision truly meant. I stared at the message for a long time, rereading it as if maybe, just maybe, it would morph into something else the longer I looked. But it didn't. It just sat there like a stone in my chest. And the worst part? I didn't even ask why. Because somewhere deep inside, I already knew. See, when people say family, they picture warmth, support, messy love, and shared memories over holiday meals. But when I think of my family, I think of careful avoidance, invisible lines drawn in the carpet, and a quiet, persistent sense that I've always been the extra limb nobody asked for. I'm not the dramatic one, not the failure, not the addict or the rebel. I'm the quiet daughter, the one who got a job, paid her bills, never called in a panic, never asked for help, yet somehow, that steadiness was the very thing that made me invisible. I didn't bring chaos to the table, so they never noticed whether I showed up at all. The vacation was to Hawaii, Maui, to be exact. A family of 4, minus the 4th. Mom, Dad, my younger sister Lauren, and her fiancé, Evan. They stayed at one of those oceanfront resorts with private beach cabanas and matching family t-shirts, which I saw, not because they sent me photos, but because Lauren posted every filtered second to her social media, like she was the main character of a soap opera that just happened to be shot in paradise. There they were, laughing under palm trees, clinking glasses of champagne, ziplining in matching helmets, and nowhere, not in a single frame, was there any sign I had ever existed in that family. Not even a mention. And yet, I still fed the dog. I was house-sitting while they were gone, because despite being unwanted at the beach, I was still reliable enough to make sure Milo didn't ruin the hardwood floors. I didn't mind Milo. He was the only one in that house who greeted me with enthusiasm and didn't look through me like I was wallpaper. On the second night, I poured myself a glass of wine, not the expensive bottle in the cabinet, but the cheap one I'd brought myself, and I walked through the house slowly, the way you do when you know no one will be there to stop you. I opened drawers I wasn't supposed to open, not out of malice, but because, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being caught. And that's when I found it. In Lauren's closet, tucked behind her carry-on bag and a stack of bridal magazines, was a manila envelope, thick, labeled in my father's handwriting with her full name. I wouldn't have opened it if it hadn't said that name. But it did. Inside were property documents, copies of the house deed, notarized paperwork, and what looked like the beginnings of a trust. Not for the family. Not split between siblings. Just Lauren. Her name, in bold, over and over again, while mine was nowhere to be seen. I stood there, holding the papers with a kind of numb clarity, realizing that this wasn't just about a vacation or a forgotten birthday or a quiet, aching sense of being on the outside. It was about erasure. Systematic, intentional, complete erasure. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even finish the wine. I sat down on the couch and stared at the ceiling until my eyes blurred, and I remembered, with searing precision, a conversation from 3 years ago when I'd offered to help cover Mom's medical bills during her surgery. She'd thanked me sweetly and told me, "You'll get it back one day, sweetheart. This house is yours as much as it is Lauren's." I had believed her. And I hated that I had. I hated how easily I'd clung to that promise, how I'd carried it around like a talisman every time they left me out of something else, every time Lauren was praised and I was passed over, every time my quiet reliability was met with a pat on the head while she was given keys, praise, money, and endless forgiveness. But now, that one sentence I had relied on had rotted, and what remained was the truth, brittle and sharp. I was never part of the plan. When I locked the closet and returned everything exactly as it was, I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. I felt the kind of calm that only arrives when you stop asking for something and finally accept the answer you've always known was coming. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to scream or explain or beg, because they had already made their decision. Now it was time I made mine. I opened my laptop that night and began researching property law, inheritance loopholes, and the specific clauses that applied to my late grandmother's estate, because unlike them, I hadn't forgotten that Nana had left something behind, and that something wasn't Lauren's by default. It was messy and old and half-forgotten, but it was real and it was mine. And for once, I wasn't going to be quiet about it. They were halfway across the Pacific, posing in sun hats and sipping pineapple mojitos, smiling as if they'd finally achieved perfect family harmony without me. And I was right here, in the shadows they had left behind, crafting something quiet, legal, and irreversible. By the time they came home, they would find everything exactly where they left it, except their assumptions. Those I would burn to the ground. And when they asked me what happened, I would do what they taught me so well. I would smile, sip my wine, and say it was just simpler this way. The days that followed my decision to act quietly, precisely, and without the emotional theatrics they had come to expect from anyone who wasn't Lauren, moved with a kind of surreal calm, as if time itself were allowing me to observe, prepare, and plan without interruption, without guilt, and most importantly, without interference. The house, in their absence, had taken on a different rhythm. It no longer hummed with the dull drone of parental judgment or the grating entitlement of my sister's complaints. Instead, it breathed in long silences, echoing with the soft sound of Milo's paws across the tile floor and the distant buzz of my own thoughts solidifying into something close to a strategy. It was in this stillness, this long overdue solitude, that I began to see everything for what it really was. A structure of favoritism so deeply woven into the family fabric that even the smallest of gestures had been manipulated to reinforce one narrative: Lauren is the one who matters most. It wasn't a single event that built that truth, of course, but rather the accumulation of moments, the invisible paper cuts that never quite healed. The time Dad took Lauren to Europe for her high school graduation, while I was handed a card with $50 and told that we just couldn't swing something big this time. Or the way Mom had once insisted that Lauren needed a new car for safety reasons, while I drove an ancient Toyota whose brakes groaned like a wounded animal and whose check engine light had been on so long it felt like part of the dashboard design. Or the countless birthdays where my cake came from the grocery store and hers was flown in from that one bakery in Boston because she just really loves their lemon filling. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that being the dependable one had its own rewards, I didn't cause trouble, I didn't need rescuing, and surely that meant something. But now I realized that in a house like this, silence was mistaken for insignificance, and self-reliance was interpreted as consent to be overlooked. I found the second clue to their long-running betrayal not buried in some secret drawer or hidden behind a false panel, but in the most mundane of places, the office filing cabinet, under a tab that simply read Utilities. I wasn't snooping for secrets at the time, not exactly. I had been searching for a copy of the house key that Lauren had once smugly claimed was hers alone because she had always been the one who actually helped out around here. What I found instead, sandwiched between water bills and maintenance receipts, was a folder labeled Transfer Partial. The word partial was what drew me in. Inside was a notarized agreement, dated 2 years ago, in which my parents had transferred a portion of the house's ownership, not the full deed, but enough to make her a legal stakeholder, directly into Lauren's name, with an annotation in the margin that read, as discussed. Quiet process, no need to involve my name. No need to involve me. I read those words 3 times, as if their meaning might soften with repetition, but they didn't. They only sharpened. It was in that moment I realized that not only had I been excluded from their vacation, I had also been excluded from the future, their future, the house, the legacy, the inheritance, the entire unspoken system of what it means to be part of a family's long-term vision. They had handed the torch to Lauren without a second thought, and they had done it behind my back, counting on the same thing they had always counted on, my silence. my unwillingness to make waves, my loyalty. But this time, I didn't feel loyal. I felt awake. I didn't cry. I didn't text anyone. I didn't even speak it aloud. I just sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began taking notes, not emotional ramblings, but dates, document numbers, clause references, screenshots, and scanned copies. I created folders, backups, encrypted drives. I wasn't sure yet what my endgame would look like, but I knew this much. It would be clean, legal, and undeniable. And somewhere in the middle of all that, between scanning documents and photographing Lauren's designer handbags for inventory purposes, I began to understand the value of the things they took for granted. Because while Lauren was busy posting ocean selfies and sipping cocktails under palm trees, I was turning their house into a case file, not because I wanted revenge, but because I had finally accepted the reality that I owed them nothing. No loyalty. No silence. No understanding. They had always treated me like a guest in my own family, and now I would respond in kind. By the fifth day, I had discovered something else, something more fragile, more personal, and far more useful than any legal paper. In a shallow storage bin under Lauren's bed, mixed with old makeup bags and college memorabilia, I found a set of ultrasound photos, dated 3 months ago, tucked into a greeting card with no envelope. The card said, "Can't wait to meet baby Evan," in my mother's handwriting. And just like that, the puzzle made sense. The vacation wasn't just a vacation. It was a celebration. A secret one. A baby moon disguised as a family trip. A reward for Lauren, and an opportunity for my parents to solidify their perfect daughter's future. That house transfer? Probably part of a bigger plan to prepare the nest. And me? I was the silence they needed to complete the illusion. I put the photos back exactly where I found them, closed the bin gently, and sat there in the half-light of her perfectly curated room, thinking not of revenge, not yet, but of justice. Because they had counted me out. They had deemed me irrelevant. And they had forgotten that sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones who remember everything. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't delete her photos or slash her clothes or burn anything down. I just started listing every single item in the house that belonged to her. For inventory. For legal clarity. For future use. Because when she returned, she would learn the first rule of crossing someone who'd been ignored too long. I may have fed their dog, but they fed me lies, and I've never had a better appetite for consequences. Lauren came home the way she always did, like she owned the air around her, like gravity itself had conspired to curve the world toward her convenience, and as if the threshold of any house she walked into should instinctively greet her with warmth, flattery, and the effortless absence of consequences. She didn't text ahead, didn't knock, didn't even hesitate. The wheels of her luggage clicked across the driveway like a metronome of entitlement, designer sunglasses still perched on her nose even though the clouds had gathered thick over the cul-de-sac and the sun had dipped an hour earlier. She reached for the handle with one perfectly manicured hand, confident, impatient, perhaps even rehearsing a speech in her head about how tired she was from the flight and how dehydrated her skin felt despite the resort spa being a joke. Compared to the one she usually went to in Napa. She didn't get to deliver any of it. The door didn't open. Instead, what met her hand was resistance, cold, metallic, and absolute. The key, the one she always used with a flourish, no longer worked. She tried again, then a third time, shaking it now, as if the mechanism had simply forgotten how to obey her. It hadn't. It had just been changed. Above the handle, taped with precision and protected by a transparent sheet cover, was a document she wasn't prepared to see, a legal notice printed in bold type, with her full name written across the top and the words "right of occupancy terminated" just below. The language was clinical, but the intent was personal. She didn't live here anymore. That was when her voice cracked through the neighborhood air, loud, shrill, the kind of disbelief that's half indignation, half panic. I watched from the upstairs window, not hiding, not smiling, just watching as her gaze fell on what lay next, for suitcases lined up neatly against the garden wall, each tagged with color-coded labels I had created days earlier. A clothing rack with her seasonal coats, covered in plastic, 2 boxes filled with her makeup collection and miscellaneous desk items, and a neatly folded stack of mail, unopened, bound with a ribbon and a note that simply read, "Return to sender." It took her a moment to connect the dots, and when she did, she turned her rage toward the door, pounding with her fists, calling my name like I was a misbehaving child rather than the legal owner of the threshold she was now locked out of. I didn't open it. I didn't speak. I just stood still, calm, and let her scream. Eventually, she stepped back, dialing furiously, trying our parents, Evan, probably even her real estate agent, anyone who might validate her belief that this was a mistake, a glitch in her otherwise seamless life narrative. But it wasn't a mistake. It was the result of weeks of planning, quiet acquisition, and a clause in my grandmother's original property trust that my father either overlooked or dismissed as too outdated to matter. What he failed to understand, what they all failed to understand, was that outdated doesn't mean irrelevant. It means dormant, waiting, untriggered until someone, like me, with a long memory and a legal pad, decided to invoke it. Nana had left the house in a trust, to be shared equally among her direct descendants, and though my parents had the right to live here for life, any transfer of ownership beyond that was supposed to be reviewed by both beneficiaries, which, despite their efforts to forget, included me. When I presented the trust documents to an attorney, she raised an eyebrow, smiled, and said, "You know, this is actually enforceable. If you want it." I didn't answer her right away. But now, watching Lauren flail in the driveway, I wished I could have told that lawyer just how much I wanted it, not out of vengeance, not even out of spite, but because for the first time, I was no longer asking to be let in. I already was. An hour later, my parents arrived, their car screeching into the drive with the kind of urgency usually reserved for emergencies. And I suppose, to them, this was one. My mother stepped out first, her expression caught between panic and disbelief, her eyes scanning the yard, taking in the boxes, the suitcases, the notice, and then the absence of any welcome. My father, slower to exit, looked at the door, then up toward the window where I still stood, and I could see it then, the moment it clicked. Not just what I'd done, but how long I must have been preparing to do it. He opened his mouth to speak, but I was already walking downstairs. I didn't open the front door. I didn't need to. Instead, I slid an envelope under it, heavy, with 3 things inside: a copy of the trust documentation they had ignored, a receipt of the transaction where I had legally reclaimed the share Lauren was illegally granted, and a photo. The photo wasn't dramatic or sentimental. It was one Lauren herself had posted just days earlier, captioned, "Finally, the family we've always dreamed of," showing all 3 of them, my parents and Lauren, standing on a beach in Maui, grinning, arms linked, the sunset behind them golden and perfect. I wasn't in it, of course. I had never been invited. And that's exactly why I included it. Because sometimes a reminder is more cutting than any insult. I watched through the peephole as they opened the envelope. My father's face hardened, my mother's hand trembled, and Lauren just stared. I imagined she had never truly considered that someone like me, someone who never yelled, never fought back, never competed, could be capable of removing her from the narrative with such precision, with such quiet finality. And when the yelling started again, because of course it did, I simply turned off the porch light and walked back upstairs, past the bedroom where her floral throw pillows used to sit, past the bathroom that no longer smelled like her imported shampoo, and into the room I had claimed not just as a statement, but as a declaration of something far greater than property or power. I wasn't fighting for attention anymore. I was building a life from the ashes of their neglect. And they could stand on the lawn all night if they wanted. Because you don't need a key if you own the lock. And I had locked them out, one signature at a time. For a girl so accustomed to being adored without question, Lauren didn't handle humiliation well, especially the public kind. The kind that couldn't be deleted with a well-filtered photo or softened by a flattering caption filled with emojis and faux gratitude. She had always known how to play the role of the effortlessly admired daughter, the golden girl whose setbacks were spun into stories of resilience, and whose privileges were dressed up as rewards for being just naturally gifted. But what she encountered on that cold gray afternoon, with her life boxed up on the lawn and her access revoked not just physically but symbolically, was a kind of rejection she had never tasted, a quiet, calculated displacement that couldn't be undone with tears, charm, or manipulation, because this time the person she had underestimated wasn't some ex or frenemy from college, it was her own sister. The one she had ignored until it was convenient to remember I existed. I didn't need to tell anyone what had happened. Lauren did that for me. The moment she left the driveway, screaming, flailing, making vague threats about lawyers and reputations, she began performing for the only audience she had ever truly cared about, her online following. Within hours, her Instagram stories lit up like an emergency broadcast, grainy videos of her crying in the passenger seat of Evan's Tesla, zoomed-in footage of the legal notice on the door, cropped just so no actual law could be read, and long text boxes filled with phrases like, "My sister blindsided me," "toxic family dynamics," and "when people show you who they are, believe them." The comments came pouring in sympathy, outrage, the usual performance of empathy that always blooms in the fertile ground of curated victimhood, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I'd miscalculated. If public sentiment would somehow sway what I knew to be legal and justified into something morally ambiguous. But then something strange happened. People began asking questions. It wasn't the legal wording that caught their attention, most of them couldn't even see it, but rather the inconsistencies in Lauren's story, the way she avoided details, the way her timeline didn't quite match up, the fact that she never explained why she was removed from a house she supposedly owned. And then, inevitably, someone brought up the baby. Or rather, the absence of one. See, Lauren's entire identity had recently shifted into a soft life narrative, the glowing mother-to-be, the bride-to-be, the daughter everyone envied, and her followers, mostly women who had grown up being told to be quiet and agreeable, were invested in the fairy tale. So when a few of them realized that her carefully constructed narrative might be missing a crucial piece, that the ultrasound photo she'd posted briefly in a story weeks ago had disappeared without mention, and that Evan hadn't posted anything in months, the tone shifted. Whispers turned into doubts, and doubts turned into speculation. Meanwhile, I remained silent. I didn't respond to her posts. I didn't make a statement. I didn't leak any documents or screenshots. But I did send one email. Just one. It went to Evan, with no message in the body, no greeting, no explanation, only a PDF attachment containing two things: a timestamped security camera image from the night Lauren arrived home, standing outside, not entering, not living there, and a copy of the trust clause my father had failed to honor, the clause that voided any unauthorized property transfer without the consent of both named descendants. I don't know how long it took him to read it, or whether he even responded to Lauren about it, but 4 days later, I received a wedding cancellation notice in the mail. Not addressed to me, not personalized, just the kind vendors send to inform invitees of a change in plans. Which meant two things: the wedding was off, and Lauren hadn't even bothered to pretend I was ever on the guest list. After that, things began to unravel faster than even I had anticipated. Lauren moved in with a friend temporarily, or so her last post claimed, and my parents, humiliated and infuriated, tried to regain control the only way they knew how, through guilt. The first call from my mother came late at night, the kind of hour where voices sound more fragile than they really are and apologies slip out like half-drunk confessions. She didn't start with anger. She started with memories. "Remember when you used to sing to Nana while brushing her hair, and she always said you had the voice of a bird." I almost laughed. A bird? How poetic. But birds don't live in cages, and I had finally broken mine wide open. When the memories didn't work, she shifted tactics. "How could you do this to your sister? She's not well. She's hurting." I didn't answer right away, because I wanted to make sure she heard the silence for what it was, not indecision, but deliberation. And then I said, "She wasn't hurting when she smiled on that beach without me. She wasn't hurting when." She posted a picture with a caption that erased me from the family. She's only hurting now because she lost the part she never thought she'd have to fight for. But it was the next sentence that truly cracked something open, and maybe she should hurt. Maybe that's the only way she'll ever learn what it felt like to be me all these years. The phone went quiet. I could hear her breathing, could picture her sitting on the edge of her bed in that overly floral room with the embroidered pillows that said, "Family is everything." I waited, because I knew what was coming. "You've made your point," she finally said. "Now please stop." But I wasn't making a point. I was making a boundary. And for the first time in my life, it was one they couldn't cross, not with guilt, not with tears, not even with the myth of family unity they had always used like a blanket to smother my objections. So I let the silence hang. And when she asked, softly, "Don't you want to come back? Just talk to us?" I replied, without malice, "Now you want to talk?" Because the truth was the truth they had spent years avoiding, was that I had always wanted to talk, but they had never been ready to listen. And now I was done speaking just to fill the space they never cared to inhabit. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't feel like absence, like a void or an empty space waiting to be filled, but instead feels like a presence in itself, dense, undeniable. Thick with everything that was never said out loud and everything that will never be explained, because explanation was never the point. That's the silence that settled over the house in the days and weeks after my mother's voice disappeared from my phone and my sister stopped trying to claw her way back into a version of her life, where doors simply opened and consequences never arrived. The silence wasn't lonely, it was clarifying. It wasn't the cold shoulder of a sulking child or the calculated quiet of passive aggression. It was the kind of quiet that follows a storm, not because the storm has passed without damage, but because the people left standing have run out of lies to shout. I didn't change the locks again, I didn't need to. The physical barriers had long since become irrelevant. What kept them out now wasn't metal or keypads or legal clauses. It was the uncomfortable weight of knowing they had finally miscalculated someone they thought they'd already defined. My sister had always believed that my silence made me weak, that my calm demeanor meant I didn't notice, didn't care, or worse, didn't deserve a voice in how this family operated. My parents, in their own way, had fed that belief, not through cruelty or overt abuse, but through something far more insidious. Neglect wrapped in politeness, exclusion hidden behind the mask of keeping the peace, and decades of allowing the more dramatic sibling to monopolize the air in every room we ever shared. But the silence I embraced now wasn't the same one they had grown comfortable with. It wasn't compliance or surrender, it was a closing statement, a final chapter written in invisible ink and left to hang in the air like perfume long after the wearer has walked away. I renovated the house, not out of spite, but because I needed to reclaim every corner that had once whispered someone else's name. The floral curtains in the guest room, Lauren's old room, were torn down and replaced with soft slate-gray drapes that didn't scream for attention, but held the light in a way that made mornings feel like a beginning instead of a memory. The kitchen, once dominated by my mother's obsession with rooster-themed decor and ceramic fruit, was stripped bare and redone in cool, modern lines, with copper handles and a dark marble countertop that didn't apologize for being bold. I planted sunflowers in the front yard, not because I liked them, though I did, but because Lauren hated them, once calling them weeds with a PR team, and now, their unapologetic, beaming faces greeted me every morning like a quiet rebellion in bloom. And then, one Tuesday morning, a package arrived. It was a brown cardboard box, unmarked except for my name in my mother's handwriting, neat, slightly tilted, still using the same brand of pens she'd bought in bulk since I was in high school. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it for longer than I care to admit. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend it didn't exist the way they had pretended I didn't exist in so many pivotal moments of their curated life. But another part of me, a smaller, more stubborn fragment that still remembered Christmas mornings and chicken soup when I was sick, couldn't help but slice the tape open. Inside were pieces of me. Not metaphorically, literally. My childhood books, dog-eared and musty, some still with the library stickers I used to play pretend with when I thought I'd grow up to be a librarian. A knitted scarf from Nana that had vanished years ago and had apparently been tucked away in some drawer I was never meant to open again. A set of photo albums, filled not with family portraits, but with the candid snapshots I'd taken, me behind the camera, always observing, always on the fringe. And nestled among the items, folded carefully in an envelope that smelled faintly of lavender, was a handwritten note. It didn't say, "I'm sorry." It didn't beg. It didn't explain. It said, "Please come home. We miss you, Mom." That was it. No justification. No excuses. Just a sentence that hovered somewhere between confession and plea. But I didn't answer. I didn't call. I didn't even text. Because what she was asking for, what they were all hoping for, in their silent, belated desperation, wasn't really for me to come home. It was for me to pretend nothing had changed, to patch over the cracks and return to the shape they had always wanted me to fit inside, the silent daughter, the background character, the spare in the family photo that could be cropped out without ruining the composition. But I was no longer willing to compress myself into that mold just to maintain their comfort. I had learned something they never expected I would, that sometimes peace isn't found in reconciliation, it's found in the decision to stop trying to belong to people who only love you when you're quiet. I drove to the beach a few days later, not to chase some poetic metaphor, but because I needed to see the place where their perfect vacation photo had been taken, the one I had printed and slid under the door like a mirror they never wanted to look into. The bench was still there, weathered now, its paint peeling, the ocean behind it wild and gray instead of tranquil and blue like it had been in the photo. I sat for a long time, watching the waves roll in, letting the wind tangle my hair, not thinking, not analyzing, just existing fully, quietly, and completely alone. And in that stillness, I felt something shift, not closure, not forgiveness, not the neat ending of a story with a moral and a bow, but something simpler, deeper, and far more honest. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't missing anymore. I was simply done. And as I stood up to leave, brushing sand from my coat and turning back one last time to look at the sea that had once held all their dreams and none of mine, I realized I didn't need to go home to be whole. Because I had never left myself behind in the first place. They just never noticed I was there. And now, silence is the only language they understand.